It is Wednesday, November 15th, 2023. And we're live in the early hours of on a Wednesday morning to talk at first about a bit of some good news on the Bishop Strickland front, if we can find any good news in that. And then we'll talk a little bit about the how some of the modernist media are now covering this because they have finally chimed in. I was expecting them to do so, and they aren't even all on the same page when it comes to their talking points, which is, of course, delightful. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with this today um, because the modernists aren't sending their best. But so what we are going to talk about first is, of course, diving right into the story is our story today based on what we're talking about here from what the title of this video is. I can find my link here. Okay, hold on. Let's try this again. The screen sharing feature is something I'm still trying to get used to. Here we go. So, from Gloria TV, first U.S. bishop stands with Strickland. It's a very short piece. As always, there's always a clever sort of artwork from Gloria TV. The first U.S. bishop stands with Strickland. U.S. military auxiliary Bishop Joseph Coffey will join Bishop Joseph Strickland in a rosary at noon on November 14th, yesterday, and again today at November 15th, outside the Convention Hotel Marriott Waterfront in Baltimore, where the U.S. bishops are currently meeting for their autumn assembly. The prayer is open to all. Strickland, whom Francis unjustly sacked last weekend, is not attending the bishops' meeting. He is in Baltimore because he already had booked his flight there. And that is the sum of that story. So it's an auxiliary bishop. So depending how you look at it, maybe he's more protected than than a normal ordinary would be, or maybe he's not, and it'd be easier to get rid of. People will debate that endlessly. I don't think that him simply expressing support for Bishop Strickland would be enough to do anything but maybe mar his chances for advancement in the hierarchy. And a good bishop probably doesn't care much about their chance for advancement anyway, right? So it's good to see at least one. But if you were like me and you were paying attention, you were following in some way or another the debates going on at the actual conference yesterday in Baltimore, you may have noticed that he wasn't brought up. They had a long conversation with Cardinal Pierre, the Apostolic Nuncio. And the Nuncio was got himself in some hot water a few weeks ago. I think last week I brought you the story about how he said that American bishops don't really get Francis, and how he went on this long spiel about the Aparecida conference and how that's restructuring the church and all this other stuff. And that earned him some pushback, of course. So this was his attempt to make amends. And they had a long conversation that was very meh in general. It wasn't anything that important that was going on that first day. I imagine that we will get some good news, or newsworthy events rather, out of the bishops conference in the coming days, especially today. I think today or tomorrow is their last day. So good morning to everybody here. And we're going to have, just for those who are joining us a little bit late, I've already talked about this, but we will do so again briefly because it is so short. So it's a short story here. It is our first bishop to stand with Strickland is the U.S. military auxiliary Bishop Joseph Coffey, who has joined him in offering the rosary yesterday and will do so again today outside of the conference of the U.S. bishops in Baltimore, where they're having a sounds like pleasant conversation with the U.S. The Apostolic Nuncio to the United States, Cardinal Pierre. Now, a couple thoughts here. One, as I mentioned this yesterday in my stream on how many bishops Francis has gotten rid of, it's noteworthy that Cardinal Pierre was made a cardinal when one of his predecessors, Archbishop Vigano, was notably not. And I do kind of think that was a slight against Vigano, but, or maybe it was just the reward for a job well done for Cardinal Pierre. I don't really know, but it does seem like a bit of a slight. The other thing worth noting here is that the U.S. bishops responded to Francis's call in Laudate Deum. That's Laudato Si 2, basically, for taking care of all green issues and stuff about the environment and that kind of that stuff, and responded positively to it. So there you go. The U.S. bishops are gonna refocus their efforts to go all in on that topic. Let me know what you think of that in the chat, please, or in the comments. Roseanne Rossi in the chat says the USCCB is dangerous. It's actually worse than that. Did you know that there is no canonical standing for any of these national bishops' conferences? They are a pure fabrication of the post-Vatican II era. There's no historic precedent for them, really. The closest you might get are like national synods where bishops would meet at the national level to deal with some issue unique to, say, France or wherever it was there, whatever group of bishops it was. But otherwise, the national bishops' conferences were invented by Cardinal Bernardin, of all people, and a few others around the world at the same time. Isn't that the cardinal that told Bishop Strickland that there's no deposit of faith? Yes, Cardinal Pierre is the same one who didn't seem to understand the concept of a deposit of faith. In fact, there's a lot of misunderstanding right now going on about theology in general with a lot of these guys, because we're going to talk about here how the modernists aren't on the same page with each other. So let's move right over to the National Catholic Reporter, which is neither Catholic or really a reporting outlet. And here we get Strickland's removal hangs over the U.S. Bishops' Fall meeting, as it should. Remember that headline, because the modernists are not on the same page with each other. But now, the other article I'm going to compare this to is the one from America Magazine. And America Magazine is, by comparison to the National Catholic Reporter, more like the National Catholic Register, meaning America Magazine, for all the faults of it being a Jesuit outlet run by Pastor Jimmy Martin of the Jesuit Church, the America Magazine is pretty moderate by comparison to this. So this article comes to us by the way of by Michael Sean Winters, who is somebody that I periodically will, read their articles from on this channel, and we get a lot of fun out of it. And you'll notice here on the other story, on the other side, where it says how they characterize Strickland being canned by Francis, they talk about him being the darling of right-wing Twitter. So to give you an idea what kind of outlet we're dealing with here, remember the secular labels about political labels don't work in the church. They don't. Most Catholics find themselves politically like uncomfortable bedfellows with any secular politicians, just because our views don't fit neatly into one box or another, not typically. But I want to give you this. This is pretty funny. So from the article, quote, every year when one comes to report on the plenary meeting of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in Baltimore, you see some familiar faces and some new ones. One person I did not expect to see here was Bishop Joseph Strickland, who was relieved of the pastoral governance of his diocese on Saturday, November 11th. I figured that such a momentous and tragic event would cause him to go to a monastery and contemplate, or return to his family to center himself. But Sunday night, sitting with friends at the James Joyce pub around the corner from the Marriott Hotel where the Bishops' Conference meets, there was Strickland. He was sitting with three people I did not recognize. The poet for whom the pub is named famously said that being Catholic means here comes everybody, which reflects a rather different ecclesiology from that of the neo-Jansenist bishop. So I found it odd he chose that location for a drink with friends. I did not disturb Strickland. Others have done enough of that. End quote. All right, let's take a talk briefly about what it means to be a neo-Jansenist. Jansenism is a heresy. It's an ancient heresy from like the time of basically St. Augustine. We're talking that's how ancient it is. And it denies free will and grace. Sean Michael Winters is calling Bishop Strickland a heretic. On what grounds? I have no idea. Probably because he doesn't get along with Francis's come one, come all, everybody receive the Eucharist. There's no such thing as sacrilegious communion. Come one, come all, let's bless all the, whatever the world was calling a pairing these days, come one, come all stuff that Francis does that flies completely in the face of 2,000 years of history. Strickland is among the American bishops, probably the one who is the most recognizably Catholic in an actual truly hermeneutic of continuity way. All right. Compared to most of these others. I will say that I understand why the author of this piece was surprised that Bishop Strickland showed up at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops meeting, because you know who else could, in theory, show up but doesn't? Cardinal Burke, because he's an American bishop, but he has not been an ordinary in the United States in a long time. And when they removed him, if you watched my live stream yesterday, you know that he was removed back in like 2014 from his important offices and has basically been cast to the sidelines completely since the aftermath of the initial dubia back in 2017. So that's what we're dealing with here. Let's get back to this. So here's the main point. Quote, Strickland's removal hangs over the proceedings this week. The bishops with whom I have spoken are almost universally saddened by his reckless attacks on the Holy Father. None expressed any reservations about the decision to remove Strickland. It had to be done. They recognize, however, that while a new bishop in Tyler, Texas might be able to repair the damage within the diocese, the pernicious influence caused by Strickland's social media presence might continue. The boundaries of a diocese do not exist on X. X, formerly known as Twitter, I'll never call it X, by the way, has dragged many people away from the norms that govern their guild. People engage social media and it can be addictive. It offers almost immediate gratification in the form of instantaneous replies to whatever one posts. Okay, so as an aside, first he called him a heretic, and now he's undermining his integrity and his character with this piece. This is why, if you hear me laughing when reading this stuff, it's the brazenness of what they're doing that I'm laughing at. It's incredible to see what they're doing. Like, you and I could not get away with these kind of things. I'm usually much more blunt with what things I say. Here, he's trying to very slyly undermine Strickland's credibility on a personal level, on a moral level. If you forget that the algorithms that govern it reward outrage, not wisdom, you can easily find yourself wrapped up in a whirlwind of alternative hypotheses and crackpot ideas, especially during the isolation required to combat the 2020 problem. It was a lifeline for many, but a dangerous one. Social media offers so much information with so few filters. That's a call for censorship. Still, you would think a Catholic bishop would be leery of any means of communication that lack all mediation. The church exists to mediate the divine revelation. Its ministers need to mediate its doctrines. Its teachers mediate its teachings. As early as the Acts of the Apostles, we see that the whole governs the parts, that the apostles act in a collegial manner and submit to the decisions of the group even while they retain their distinctive qualities. This balancing between the individual person and culture and communion of the whole in the Catholic Church has persisted even as the Church has become a worldwide communion. As I noted yesterday, Strickland is not the only bishop with reservations about the direction in which Pope Francis is leading the Church. I call it Francis derangement syndrome. And we'll leave that there. So, you see what they're doing to Bishop Strickland here. National Catholic Reporter has famously been told by U.S. bishops to stop calling itself Catholic. They have refused. Another outlet was also told to stop calling itself Catholic in its early days of its online work, and that was Church Militant, which used to call itself Real Catholic TV. And to his credit, Michael Voris acknowledged what the bishops asked him to do, because it was within their authority to do so, and change the name of the organization. The National Catholic Reporter has never done that. And so here you see what they're doing to Bishop Strickland. We're going to check some comments here, and then we're going to go on to what I mean by how they're not getting their talking points on the same side. Bishop Strickland was brilliant when he spoke to the Rome Life Forum post-synod. Yeah, his talk was very spicy, and I think that was the final thing. I do, in hindsight, think that really was. Although, honestly, I think this decision to remove him was already made the moment they sent their bishop lackeys to his diocese to investigate what was going on, especially when you consider that the bishops they sent were morally questionable at best, and when you consider that a Catholic media figure was apparently organizing with priests to oppose Bishop Strickland and the direction he was taking things, and they were like working together. I should go check out the CBA. Dean, send me an email with that. Don't put a link in the chat, because links don't work on my channel. I have to do that to protect my channel from people posting impure links and, con artists and things. But send me an email in the description box. You'll find an email address. Send me a link to that. I'll watch that, and maybe I'll bring that up tomorrow. Although I can't play news broadcast stuff here because it's the copyright on it. Let's see. Babylon Bee. Yeah, that article has been gone everywhere, and it's Babylon Bee. When they're right, right. That article used the term guild about. Yeah, that was a weird thing, but I think they tend to think of the bishops as a guild or something. I don't know why they use that. I'm only used to seeing Catholics in the modern sense, right, using the term guild when talking about Catholic social teaching, like the church's view the church's view going back to the 18th century and before on proposing economic systems instead of what we, a Catholic view of economics instead of the way we do things in the world now. Well, using that now, Nova Sort of Catholics try to ignore Francis to a dangerous place. Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Is Mother Miriam in Tyler? If she is, that's interesting. Send me again, Harmony. Send me an email with any information you might have about that, because Mother Miriam used to be in my diocese. Actually, she used to go to my parish. So, but let's compare this now to the other story here that I think is from the more, I can't believe I'm characterizing it this way, the more moderate America magazine. Okay. So, analysis: Bishop Strickland's removal is administrative, not a punishment. Right. So, you're going to hear from this article that from a canonist, and we're going to talk, this is going to be definitely like a Francis Church canon lawyer. All right. What they are saying, because there is a flip side to this that is worth really considering. So what they say here is that now Bishop Strickland is functionally a retired priest who remains incardinated in his diocese, said Father Beale, professor of canon law at the Catholic University of America. It means he's still attached to his diocese, even though he's not the one who is the local ordinary, at least for the time being. Now, I'll imagine that will probably change when a new ordinary is placed, because can you have two bishops incarnated in the same diocese? Unless, of course, they're going to start referring to him as Bishop Emeritus Strickland, which would be weird. According to their canonist, the removal does not affect Bishop Strickland's ability to function as a bishop in the spiritual realm, at least thus far, said Father Beale. Thus far. There may be more coming down. I expect this is also why you're probably seeing Bishop Strickland, for one of the reasons anyway, that you might see him not moderating his tone, just being more careful with what he says, because they are probably going to look for any reason to cause him further problems. It says there's been nothing said otherwise, so they would have to make it public if they were going to limit his spiritual ministry. Father Beale added that the removal does not of itself entail any wrongdoing. It's just a pastoral judgment that the ministry had become detrimental or ineffective in that particular place, he told Our Sunday Visitor News November 12th. In addition, it's important to distinguish between the penal privation or deposition of a bishop for canonical delict or crime and the administrative removal, he said. The penal privation has a long lineage going back to the early church, where a bishop was accused of some wrongdoing, he said. Often in the early church it was heresy, and they were removed. After the 11th century Gregorian reform, led by Pope Gregory VII, who sought to address the issues of simony, canonical elections, and clerical celibacy, the removal process started to become something that the Pope was actively involved in. Following the Gregorian reform, popes would send out papal legates to the hinterlands to enforce the reform measures and call synods where accusations could be made and people could be deposed. Over the last millennium, the penal deposition or privation of the office of bishop, like other loss of offices for canonical crimes, has been done through a penal process, a judicial process where the Pope is the ultimate judge, although he usually delegates somebody else to do it for him. The administrative removal is a more recent development in church history, said Father Beale, who noted the procedure is used to address cases, quote, when someone's ministry has become detrimental or effective. Father Beale said the administrative removal of pastors for such reasons was not instituted until 1910. The current procedure is laid out in Canons 1740 to 1752 of the Code of Canon Law. With pastors, there is a clear process to follow. However, with bishops, it's up to the Holy See, the Pope ultimately, and the dicastery for bishops to determine the process. Usually it's preceded by an apostolic visitation where people appointed by the dicastery, usually other bishops, go to the diocese in question in an interview or take testimony from people, including the bishop himself, and render a report. And then there is a decision based on that. All right. So that's the view you're getting officially. Maureen says Mother's show from Monday covers his removal. I'll have to go find her channel again and go take a look at that and see what's going to happen to her. I want to compare this, though, to, let me see. Yeah, we have, there's a couple things here. One from that we can talk about from a different perspective on this, and that includes Dr. Peter Kwasniewski has been posting this stuff. And let me take a look here. He shared something from Father Z's blog to give you an idea of the counterview on this. He says that our apostles also knew through our Lord Jesus Christ, a reference to the apostolic tradition, what Christ taught them and what was handed down through time, that there would be strife on account of the office of the episcopate. For this reason, therefore, inasmuch as they had obtained a perfect foreknowledge of this, they appointed those ministers already mentioned, and afterwards gave instructions that when they should fall asleep, meaning pass away, not retire, fathers don't retire, husbands to dioceses don't retire, other approved men should succeed them in their ministry. We are of opinion, therefore, that those appointed by them or afterwards by other eminent men with the consent of the whole church and who have blamelessly served the flock of Christ in a humble, peaceable, and disinterested way. And I think this is where the opponents of Bishop Strickland would zero in on the statement. They would accuse him of not being humble, peaceable, or disinterested. And have long time possessed the good opinion of all, that too, cannot be justly dismissed from the ministry. For our sin will not be small if we eject from the episcopate those who have blamelessly and holily fulfilled its duties. Blessed are those presbyters who have finished their course before now, have obtained a fruitful and perfect departure from this world. For they have no fear lest anyone deprive them of the place now appointed to them. But we see that you have removed some men of excellent behavior from the ministry, which they fulfilled blamelessly and with honor. So this is from something that Pope St. Clement I had to say about the dignity of the papacy, or the episcopacy. And I will be posting links to all this at today's show notes at returntotradition.org. I've got a video going live, a daily video today about Pastor Jimmy Martin's stuff and people pushing that stuff on the church. Please check that out today. It will be the recommended video at the end of this one for those catching this live stream later in the day. But the notes for today's live stream will be with those notes as well in two separate sections on the same post. So I don't bombard the people who get updates from there with a bunch of junk. But yes, that is what we're dealing with here. This is a break possibly with everything we've seen in church tradition, quite possibly, depending on how you read it. So here we're going to also check out this, which came from something Dr. Kwasniewski shared elsewhere. A different canon lawyer. Remember what we said from America Magazine about the canon law about this. A different canon lawyer said, the respected canonist Edward Peters has outlined the commentaries on Canon 416. This has to do with the removal of bishops. He examined, quote, all regard a bishop's privation of office as being possible only in the face of guilt for ecclesiastical crimes, say canonically illegal actions in regard to ecclesiastical property, against which would be violations of the codes of canon law. Peters notes that the Pope does not appear to have the power to remove a bishop under Canon 416, but that a privation is indeed possible. He writes, while removal is a general way to lose ecclesiastical office, not necessarily implying canonically criminal conduct, removal from episcopal office does not, strictly speaking, seem possible under Canon 416. Only privation seems possible, and such action implies guilt for ecclesiastical crime. What does that mean? Well, it's worth remembering here that Bishop Strickland is still a bishop. He has not been removed from the episcopate. He is a bishop still. And what he has been is essentially had the rights to his office taken from him. He has been forced into retirement, but he is still a bishop. And canonists are beginning to look to see if that's actually, something Francis has the right to do, assuming that you think he's actually the Pope. And they seem to think that he can, but if you do that, there's an implication that a canon crime has been committed. And this is where we get to process. Where has Bishop Strickland's rights been in all this? Why haven't they actually accused him of something other than mean tweets, saying nasty stuff on social media, stirring the pot in America with people like us, basically? Why haven't they accused him of anything other than that? There are canonical crimes that they could, in theory, accuse him of, fostering dissent to the Holy Father. They could accuse him of that. But then again, such a trial might be something they want to avoid at all costs. Karen Engelbrecht says Bishop Strickland didn't break any canon laws. As far as I can tell, I don't think he did it either. Good morning, Traditionalist Catholic. How are you? All Richard says, problem is that good Catholics stay quiet except for the internet. Heretics are loud and clear on destroying the church. Strangely, it's the good Catholics who finance the church. Have you noticed there's a distinct lack of traditional Catholic daily news website outlets? The Remnant isn't really daily. The National or Catholic Family News isn't really daily. I know I write articles for for Catholic Family News. There isn't a traditional Catholic version of, you know, American Magazine or National Catholic Reporter. There just isn't one. There's some conservative ones, but there's not traditional ones. And this, there is a difference. Well, the world problem is, Roseanne, the world accepts Francis as Pope, as so do the secular authorities. So what you would end up having is you would have clear schismatic problems there at that point. The appearance of it anyway. And it could very well, and Bishop Strickland has acknowledged Francis as Pope. He did it just a couple days ago in one of his posts on Twitter. I agree, Richard. Good Catholics must become involved. I would love to help somebody start a daily Catholic journalist outlet. That would be a traditional Catholic journalist outlet. That would be really good. I'd love to help it, but Karen says good news doesn't sell papers. That is so true. You have no idea. My good news videos that I would try to do once in a while, they were the worst performing things other than my educational videos Saturday and Sunday morning. Have I noticed that the Pope splainers have been piled on when they come out on social media? Oh, yes. People are not putting up with it. But you know what? Actually, in a weird way, to their credit, though, to the Pope splainers' credit, they have the courage of their convictions and they just keep pushing forward. I do sometimes wonder, though, if what they're doing is being supported by other people. My return to tradition is the daily traditional news report, unfortunately. I don't mean like, I want more competition. I mean, there's a secular YouTuber who got tired of reading news articles from other news outlets. So he finally started his own news website and he had help from other people. And maybe I should start just talking to people who would be interested in coming up with a website that we could put news articles on and things. But those things are expensive. They really are. Is there any resistance to Francis from high-ranking clergy in the developing nations? So if you mean like Africa, I mean, you've got some bishops there who say Orthodox things, but that's about it. I haven't heard them any of them say, no, the synod was a really terrible idea. What you're proposing is terrible and we should resist. I haven't seen anything like that. I'm way too hard myself. My weekend stuff is great. Well, I do appreciate that. It's just that I'm always flabbergasted with that, some of these things don't get people just aren't that interested in them. Like the exorcism video I did this last weekend. I was surprised. I really was. Father Attila told you that martyrdom is overrated. Well, it's a great way to get the crown, though. Is he a good priest or is he kind of wishy-washy? I don't know. Anyway, if Strickland refused, what would happen? You would see the bishops probably would not recognize him at the very least. The secular authorities would probably not get involved. They tend not to. I mean, there have been a whole lot of cases involving people trying to attempt to say that certain Sedevacantist online monks, they claimed they weren't real monks and weren't really Catholic, and they took them to court. And those online monks won because the court said that it's not their job to determine who really is Catholic or who really is a monk. That's one example. The secular authorities rarely want to get involved in church stuff unless there's some sort of criminal conduct involved. The extreme fasting might be. I don't know, Maria. If people are, for those called to it, it may be. I'll take some final questions here before we wrap this up. So Catherine says weekend stuff is great. To be honest, the bad news is oppressive, and sometimes you need to detach, so occasionally lessen your. Yeah, I understand that. And actually, one of the reasons I always recommend as we get into fasting seasons, like there are people who will be observing a traditional Advent starting soon. Instead of detaching yourself from like the news and the church, if you don't normally watch the weekend stuff, either from me or Sensus Fidelium or anybody else, start watching some of that stuff to give you the spiritual balm you need in these times. I'm not even familiar with Spirit Daily. I'll go check that out here in a minute. So if there's anything else, though, folks, this is your time. Otherwise, I have a video going live in about 50 minutes from now on Pastor Jimmy Martin stuff and how they're projecting that they're going to have total victory in the church very soon. So, good evening to you, Teresa. You came in at the very end of the stream, so I would catch this from the beginning. Anyway, folks, I will probably be signing off here. So, thank you for tuning in today, and please keep Bishop Strickland in your prayers and pray for all of those that I mentioned in the article today, especially since I didn't really, have not much nice to say about most of them. Anyway, thanks, folks, for tuning in, and God bless you all.